Good evening. I'm David Ortiz. It's Monday, December the 3rd of 2012. You're watching Infowars Nightly News, and here's what we have in store for you tonight.
Tonight, NBC's Bob Costas uses the NFL murder-suicide tragedy to make a plea for a gun ban. Then, a veteran journalist describes a sexual assault and rape at the hands of the TSA. Plus, the New York editor says Hillary Clinton is running for president. And the mainstream media seems to be ignoring the gigantic sinkholes that are popping up around the country. All that and more coming up next on the Infowars Nightly News.
Well, it seems commentator Bob Costas wants stricter gun laws. Recently, yesterday, Bob Costas was broadcasting a football game, and he went on a rant saying that he supports an article that was recently posted by sports writer Jason Whitlock, in which Mr. Whitlock says that we should have stricter gun laws, and that what happened with the Kansas City Chiefs linebacker Javon Belcher, in which he killed his girlfriend and then murdered himself, could have been prevented with stricter gun laws. Mr. Costas then proceeded to read excerpts of Mr. Whitlock's article, which he says he supports. So let's go to that video.
Our current gun culture, Whitlock wrote, ensures that more and more domestic disputes will end in the ultimate tragedy, and that more convenience store confrontations over loud music coming from a car will leave more teenage boys bloodied and dead. Handguns do not enhance our safety. They exacerbate our flaws, tempt us to escalate arguments, and bait us into embracing confrontation rather than avoiding it.
So there you go. Bob Costas wants stricter gun laws, and this is the typical MO of the nutty left. And I say the nutty left liberals because they're usually the ones that are more anti-gun than the right, even though the right obviously has their own issues. Whenever a tragedy happens, they want to restrict our Second Amendment rights. It doesn't take much for the nutty left to want to abolish the Second Amendment. And earlier in today's Alex's radio show, Alex had a caller who said, oh, you know, what don't people understand? What doesn't the anti-gun left understand about the phrase shall not be infringed upon? And that's obviously in the Constitution, our Second Amendment rights. The right to bear arms shall not be infringed upon, Mr. Costas. But Mr. Costas wants to infringe upon your Second Amendment rights. And in terms of statistics, study after study after study shows that the safest communities, the safest states, the safest countries in the world are countries that have lax gun laws. Here in the United States, the state of Vermont has extremely lax gun laws, and it's one of the safest states in the union. Kennesaw, Georgia hasn't had a murder in over 20 years. And that's because homeowners are required by law to own a firearm. And actually, when that murder happened over 20 years ago, it happened on federal property, land that people were not allowed to walk around with guns on. So whether it be Kennesaw, Georgia, Vermont, Switzerland, one of the safest countries in the world because most men are required to serve in the military, and as a result, they have firearms in their home. And according to Reason magazine, in the UK, which has very strict gun laws, about 50% of burglaries that occur, home burglaries that occur, the homeowner is there about 50% of the time. Whereas in the United States, homeowners are only there about 10% of the time when a burglary takes place. And that's because here in the United States, burglars know that they can get shot if they try to break into someone's home. So again, study after study shows that more guns equals more safety. You look at cities like New York City, Chicago, where they have much more strict gun laws, and they're very, very dangerous. So let's continue fighting for our Second Amendment rights and not necessarily listen to these loony leftist commentators. Now, speaking of gun rights, it seems, just like Alex has said on his radio show, they're coming for the guns of veterans. According to an article posted today on both Infowars.com and FoxNews.com, the headline reads, "Veterans' Gun Rights, a Sticky Issue in Defense Bill." The article reads, Should veterans deemed too mentally incompetent to handle their own financial affairs be prevented from buying a gun? The issue for a time last week threatened to become the biggest sticking point in a $631 billion defense bill for reshaping a military that is disengaging from a decade of warfare. Senator Tom Coburn of Oklahoma sought to amend the bill to stop the Veterans Affairs Department from putting the names of veterans deemed too mentally incompetent to handle their finances into the National Instant Criminal Background Check System, which prohibits them from buying or owning firearms. Senator Charles Schumer of New York objected, saying the measure would make it easier for veterans with mental illness to own a gun, endangering themselves and others. So there you go. You had Senator Coburn saying that he doesn't want that in this huge multi-billion-dollar defense bill, whereas Charles Schumer says, yeah, we should restrict veterans from having firearms if they're deemed to have a mental illness. This bill looks like it's going to pass. Senator Coburn says he doesn't want to stop the bill based on this one measure, but he does say that he will introduce the measure in the future, a measure that would allow veterans to own guns despite them possibly having a mental illness. And even though that might sound reasonable on the surface, you know, stopping people who have a mental illness from having a gun, that's how it starts. That's how the tyranny starts. It always comes tied up in a beautiful red bow. But ultimately, they expand upon these bills, and before you know it, they make it very, very difficult for veterans to have guns, even if they don't have a mental illness. So it always starts off very harmlessly, and sure enough, these bills expand. So we have to be very mindful of this, but sadly, it looks like this bill is going to pass. Now, speaking of the police state and just continual tyranny, in an article posted today on Infowars.com and also TheVerge.com, a street artist behind satirical NYPD drone posters has been arrested. According to the article, a street artist who hung satirical posters criticizing police surveillance activities has been arrested after an NYPD investigation tracked him to his doorstep. With the help of a small crew, the artist, now identified as Assam Atiyah, had placed the fake Big Brother-style adverts in locations throughout Manhattan using a fake Van Wagner maintenance van and uniforms to avoid detection. In a video interview, Mr. Assam Atiyah said he explained that he placed the provocative ads to create a conversation about disturbing trends in police surveillance, So there you go. You have an artist who's being tracked because he posted, police state art throughout New York City. Now, obviously, what he did was illegal, but what's really concerning here is that they tracked him down. That's what's really concerning, because nobody was around, supposedly, when he was putting these up. So we don't support people putting things up illegally, but what's the reason why we're criticizing the establishment here is that they were able to track him down with almost no witnesses. Just further proof that we live in a world with drones and continual surveillance. So we do commend that artist for, stepping forward and, at the very least, designing artwork that criticizes the growing police state. And now we're going to go to a story by Gucciardi Jackson, a brief story by Gucciardi Jackson, which focuses on drones.
I'm Gucciardi Jackson for the Infowars Nightly News, bringing you our Drone Minute in anticipation for our drone mob this Saturday, December 8th in Austin, Texas. We have an article for you out of the Daily Mail. Headline: Robocod. Homeland Security adds underwater drones to their arsenal with robots based on fish. Meet Robocod, the latest weapon in Homeland Security's increasingly high-tech underwater arsenal. A robotic fish designed to safeguard the coastline of America and bring justice to the deep. Now, before we put drones in the water, I think it's a good idea to look at the drones in the air, where we can look at Pakistan, where the Pakistan Interior Minister says that 80% of the people killed by drones were non-combatants. Join Infowars this Saturday, December 8th, at Zilker Park in Austin, Texas, for our first ever drone mob in contest. Now, this is a family-friendly event. We encourage you to bring your drones and spy planes and small remote-controlled vehicles as we raise awareness that our own government is planning to use these tools against us. There will also be a contest for the best video filmed at the event with a $1,000 prize. So upload your clips to YouTube, and we'll see you this Saturday, December 8th at Zilker Park. So stay tuned to Infowars.com and also hashtag DroneMob for more details. I'm Gucciardi Jackson for the Infowars Nightly News.
And again, if you want to participate, we're going to have an event this Saturday, December the 8th at 11 a.m. at Zilker Park here in Austin, where we encourage people to bring their drone airplanes, their helicopters, even if you got a paper plane that you just want to fly around. The point is we're going to broadcast this and make people aware of the growing police state. We want to mock the establishment and let them know that we're onto them. We know that they want a surveillance state. We know that they want to infringe upon our civil liberties. And again, that's going to be taking place December the 8th at 11 a.m. at Zilker Park. Gucciardi will be there. Melissa Melton will be there. So if you have a drone, a helicopter, a plane that you just want to fly, you can do it on that day. And we also have a contest that's taking place. We'll give $1,000 to a person who creates a video of the event's festivities. For more information, go to Infowars.com. Now, in other news, in an article posted today also on Infowars.com, veteran journalist describes, quote, sexual assault, rape at the hands of the TSA. Reporter decries, quote, highly invasive groping and prohibiting of my private areas. A prominent journalist by the name of Karen Kaplan of over 20 years has written a scathing piece describing her treatment at the hands of the TSA last week in an article which she posted on Nature. The name of the outlet is called Nature. She says, quote, she was subjected to an arbitrary, unnecessary, and appalling invasive TSA pat-down, which more appropriately can be called a sexual assault. So you can see it's not just us here at Infowars that is saying this. This is another journalist, and she also said in the article, quote, the search involved highly invasive groping and probing of my private areas. As part of the procedure, which took 5 to 6 minutes, the TSA reached into my skirt, exploring front to back. I am horrified and disgusted by the experience, a clear example of absolute abuse of absolute power. And she also says later on in the article, as a white female, American over 40, a law-abiding citizen with nary so much as a traffic violation in my history, and as an editor of an eminent international science journal, I hardly fit the profile of a terrorist. So there you go. It's not just us. We have other journalists who are deeply disturbed by what the TSA is doing. And I just received confirmation from the TSA yesterday that you can film pat-downs, despite the fact you saw in my video last week that they said I could not film a pat-down. David Knight, he was able to film his pat-down. Just for clarification, TSA has confirmed to me that you can film pat-downs. So, you know, don't allow your civil liberties to be violated. We encourage you to film your pat-downs. Now, in other news, it seems that Hillary Clinton, hooray, is running for president. I know, it's quite exciting stuff. According to New York Magazine editor David Remnick, he dropped a political bombshell after attending a 3-day conference at which the Secretary of State was the keynote speaker, category stating, quote, Hillary Clinton is running for president. Oh, my gosh. He didn't say, oh, my gosh. Remnick made the observation after attending the annual Saban Forum in Washington, D.C. this past weekend, a meeting of highly influential members of the Israeli political class, including Avigdor Lieberman and Ehud Olmert. Former President Bill Clinton was also in attendance. This is not too surprising. However you feel about, you know, the moderate socialist Hillary Clinton, one thing is for sure, she is a political heavyweight, as are the Bushes. So this should come as no surprise to anybody. According to many articles, she's been trying to get the email information of many past supporters. And in my estimation, her success will depend greatly upon how well Barack Obama does in his second term. And so there you see the face of potentially our next president. And speaking of faces of Hillary Clinton, recently our reporter Darren McBreen produced a story on the many faces of Hillary Clinton.
Let me tell you something. You don't want to mess with Hillary Clinton when she's angry, because I actually did some research on the internet last night, and I found some angry Hillary Clinton photos, and when she's pissed off, she looks downright scary. And we're going to show you some examples right now. Here's a look what I'm talking about. Well, she definitely doesn't look very happy right there. Ooh, that's an angry look. That'll give you chills. This one looks like it came straight out of a classic horror movie, you know. And I think that's through Bill Clinton's eyes right there. That's what she looks. That's not angry. I think she just passed gas. I think that's what that is. And not sure what this one means. Maybe an angry kiss. I don't know. What's next? And I don't know. Maybe some of you can mark the YouTube time code. Come up with your own caption for that one. And oh, okay, I've gone too far. Try to ignore that one. And oh, this one's my favorite. Pause this one, Marcos, because this one is crazy. I mean, this is proof that there is one person capable of looking more angry, more pissed off than even Hillary Clinton, and that's Barack Obama. I mean, check out Obama's face in this picture. He looks like he's about to slap Hillary right upside her head. I wonder what happened. No doubt some tension there. They say a picture is worth 1,000 words. In this case, perhaps several thousand page views on YouTube.
And in other news, in an article posted on Infowars.com today, written by Paul Joseph Watson, it seems that Russian officials are telling media outlets not to feed into the hysteria, to the December 21st hysteria. Supposedly the end of the world, according to the Mayan calendar, is supposed to occur. Obviously, we do not believe that's going to occur here on Infowars.com. Alex finds that it to be ridiculous, people who believe that. But according to the article, politicians from Russia's state Duma have written a letter to major television networks begging them not to hysteria in the run-up to December 21st, following a wave of odd behavior by Russian citizens across the country. Quote, we discussed this and sent an official letter to executives at Russia's leading TV networks, says Mikhail, hope I pronounced this right, Degtyarev, who represents the LDPR in Russia's lower house of parliament, Duma, and is deputy chair of the Duma Science Committee. The message also cites experts at the Academy of Sciences who assert, quote, that there will be no end of the world. Quote, television has a very strong psychological influence on the audience. For that reason, TV journalists must be very responsible in selecting the information that is put on the air. So there you go. And according to the article, it also says that retail sales at retail stores are skyrocketing, and that it seems that many Russians believe the hype. Again, Alex doesn't believe the hype at all. I'm sure he'll be blamed for it once December 21st comes and goes. But we obviously here at Infowars.com think it's quite humorous, and there's no validity to it whatsoever. Now, in other news, a headline posted today by Anthony Gucciardi of Natural Society. The headline reads, why is the media ignoring the mass sinkholes popping up around the country? And the article states, have you heard of the massive sinkholes popping up around the nation? Flammable craters spanning acres wide and leaking radiation, according to Mr. Gucciardi. Some of them have been in Ohio. Some of them have been one of them has been the size of 4 football fields of land and has devoured 100-foot trees and even houses. So obviously there's grave concern, and in just a couple of minutes we're going to talk to Mr. Gucciardi. We conducted a lengthy interview with him regarding fracking and these massive sinkholes that are popping up throughout the country. So stay tuned for that. But before we go to that hard-hitting interview, let's go to our daily quote of the day. And it's from none other than Oscar Wilde. And it reads, America is the only country that went from barbarism to decadence without civilization in between. And that was from Oscar Wilde. And if you want to support our operation, become a member of PrisonPlanet.tv for less than $6 a month. You'll get some great content. You get to see Alex's show live. You get to see the show on HD. Many ebooks you will have access to. And if you want to support the Second Amendment, go to InfoWarsShop.com, and we have a shirt there. It says, "Come and take it." That obviously it's a great way to show that you support the Second Amendment, and you can get that on InfoWarsShop.com. So again, in just one moment, we'll be right back with a hard-hitting interview with Anthony Gucciardi of NaturalSociety.com. Stay tuned. Welcome back. We are now joined by Anthony Gucciardi. He is the founder of NaturalSociety.com, and he's going to talk to us a little bit about mass sinkholes, a mass sinkhole that has been found in Ohio and in several other locations. Mr. Gucciardi, thank you so much for joining us here on Infowars Nightly News.
Well, thanks a lot for having me.
Now, Mr. Gucciardi, tell us a little bit about these mass sinkholes that you talk about in the article that you posted today on Infowars.com, and why you think this is a concern.
Well, basically, there's these giant holes known as sinkholes, or mass sinkholes, that are opening up as a result of mining and fracking. They go in and they shoot high-pressured water, millions and millions of gallons of high-pressured water with contaminants like lead and diesel, and they get out the natural gases from inside of there, and it causes, in turn, over time, basically this implosion of land that's causing some serious concerns. Number one, due to the fact that right now in Louisiana it's expanding, it's swallowing up trees, the Ohio one as well, swallowing up houses, people are having to evacuate, and actually has serious implications as to geopolitical issues and what it could mean for our entire planet.
Now, why, how are these mass sinkholes created? I mean, people talk about fracking. Why are they there?
Well, basically, like I said, when you go in with fracking and you start shooting this high-powered water, think of it as a plate system. When you start destroying the lowest level or any type of foundation, if you take out the foundation of a house, ultimately it will implode. That's kind of the thinking behind this. And it's not just fracking, but sometimes really intrusive mining operations. And then you put that in with the fact that basically they're disrupting the natural flow of what's going on down there and releasing pressures that were at one time upholding everything above it. And then it implodes and leaks radon gas. And there's so many events, there's countless events right now of explosions and implosions around the areas of these fracking systems, and specifically the mass sinkholes that are all being tied together and have one common link, which is this fracking and mining operation.
Now, let me play devil's advocate here, Mr. Gucciardi. Shouldn't we be encouraging fracking since it can lead to us discovering natural gas?
Well, no, because the operation of fracking, first of all, is I'm not against private industries going in and getting natural resources and everything like that. But what I am against is fracking because of the fact that, number one, they don't even know what they're doing. As Bloomberg admits, there's really, quote, no guidelines on what they're doing. There's not even really any laws or systems. The EPA has admitted in a rather joke statement that, yeah, it's causing cancer, it's causing serious problems, but, we're going to look into it. They just have no regulations whatsoever. And here are some of the chemicals that they use in fracking. Diesel, formaldehyde. Formaldehyde, of course, is a known carcinogen. And lead. They shoot water with diesel, formaldehyde, and lead and millions of gallons, super high pressured, into the core of the earth, essentially. Not necessarily, not literally, but they're shooting underneath, miles and miles deep, shooting off this chemical water, chemical slough. It's not even really chemical water, it's chemical soup. And they're shooting it and destroying the groundwater supplies, so that when you go, and a lot of people are having this happen to them, and turn on your tap water and put a match or a lighter to it, it'll light up. Or the well water they're getting is causing, apparently, just some of the initial issues that are going along with this are lingering rashes, nosebleeds, and respiratory trauma just within a couple days of drinking this stuff.
Now, if obviously that's quite concerning, but if this is so bad, why would you support, for example, the private sector participating in fracking?
No. I don't support the private sector participating in fracking. I'm saying I'm not against any private industries going in and getting natural resources in a responsible and serious way that doesn't actually damage the environment. Fracking is not good. Fracking should be stopped, and the overall implications are much greater than health concerns as well. I do normally cover health, but this is such a big issue, it covers the entire globe. What we're looking at now is this six-fold increase in earthquakes, according to the Bloomberg report, just in the Louisiana area and where other fracking sites are. So we're talking about 600% increase in earthquakes just in the fracking area. And when you actually look at how these North American plates work, all the fracking sites are generally along the edge of the plate, which means it could be potentially damaging the plate system, which could lead to horrendous earthquakes. And just, if we see already a 600% increase in just the fracking areas, which are damaging the plates, ultimately it could lead to an 8.0 magnitude earthquake or greater. And I'm not saying that's going to happen, but there's no reason to keep this unchecked. Even the EPA admits, and others, that we should look into this. Of course, they do nothing about it because the mega industries are making millions upon billions of dollars from doing this.
Now, natural gas seems to be a boon for the United States. You know, it could resolve our energy issues. Is there a safe way of doing this? Is there a safe way of discovering natural gas?
Well, there likely is, but the fact of the matter is they don't really care, and they haven't looked into it. They just went ahead and said, okay, let's do this the most extreme way possible to make the most amount of profits. Like I said, diesel and formaldehyde shooting in and just destroying the foundation, causing sinkholes. And the more and more sinkholes are popping up everywhere this is happening, and leaking radiation and radon gas into the atmospheres at really unknown levels. So yes, I think there could be a safe way to do it. It would have to be heavily researched, and it would have to go through some checks and balances, but this is certainly not the right way to do it.
Now let's talk about these massive sinkholes. In the article that you posted today, it's on Infowars.com, but also naturalsociety.com. You said that some of these sinkholes were apocalyptic in size. What states have these sinkholes?
Well, the most notable ones now are Ohio and Louisiana. But what's interesting about the Louisiana sinkhole is it just keeps growing. It just keeps getting bigger and bigger. And then we tie this back, and here's why we call it apocalyptic. And I don't mean that it's the end of the world because of sinkholes, certainly not. I'm just saying that a lot of people are literally calling them apocalyptic because of what they represent. They represent major geo changes in the earth. And what's happening is we're finding these random explosions everywhere near fracking sites. We're finding homes blowing up. Looking back at the Indiana incident, I don't know if you remember that or the listeners remember that. Basically, what we saw with Indiana was 7,139 CPM radiation without warning, when the average is between 5 and 6. So we're talking hundreds of times larger. And then there was huge shaking booms that just snapped trees in half and just blew things up. And they said, oh, we don't know what it is. But then at the bottom of most of the mainstream articles say, oh, it could be fracking, could be some type of mining operation. So we're talking about strange cataclysmic events with multiple explosions as well. And the EPA says this is an important first indication there are potential problems with fracking that can impact domestic water wells. It's I think, a clarion call to industry to make sure they take a great deal of care in their drilling practices. When hit with all this, what's with all the explosions, what's with everything, what's with all the health concerns, they said, yeah, it could be damaging the water, but no one's even looking at the overall piece. It's like a puzzle. You have to look at each story and piece it together, and that's why not a lot of people know about this.
Now, how are local residents responding to this?
Well, a lot of them are being forced to evacuate. As the Huffington Post says in an article I just read a while ago, that the Louisiana residents shouldn't expect to be returning home anytime soon, because basically the sinkhole gets bigger and bigger and swallows everything whole, homes, trees, everything.
Okay. Now, your article also mentions that this could reawaken the New Madrid fault line. Tell us a little bit about that. I think it encompasses that fault line about 7 or 8 states.
Correct. Like I was saying, it's basically the issue here is that the tectonic plates are along the lines of where they're doing all this fracking, and they're disrupting essentially the natural order of things, as you could say. They're going in, like I said, with the high pressured water, and they're messing up the lower levels of the earth miles and miles deep and causing these acre-wide sinkholes. And the concept here is that basically through disrupting the plates along the edges, particularly, which is where it all is, which is very interesting, that the plates could be disrupted to the point where it could cause massive earthquakes. And if the New Madrid fault line or some different areas were to be affected dramatically, then even an 8.0 magnitude earthquake along that line would be reminiscent of the 1811 to 1812 earthquakes, which are considered the most powerful in all recorded history in North America.
Okay. Now, I've actually, this could be an increase in earthquakes is what we could see an increase in earthquakes is what you mentioned in your article. I keep on hearing about these small little earthquakes that are taking place in the Northeast. And I mean, could that be related to fracking and what's going on here?
Yeah, there's a way to look at the mass amount of earthquakes that are going along these areas. And like I said, it's not speculation. Actually, Bloomberg says that there is a 6-fold increase in earthquakes in the fracking areas. I mean, it's been documented pretty heavily. So there is an increase in earthquakes in the fracking areas. The real question is, will that mean an increase in earthquakes big, on a greater scale? Will it actually mess up the New Madrid fault line? Will North American plates be affected? And then that turns from just, 5.0 magnitude earthquakes here and there from the fracking sites to a massive 8.0 that would strike the West Coast.
Now, is the president or Congress doing anything about this? Have they? Are they commenting on this situation?
Not really. There's been a lot of activity by activists because if you think about it, if you live somewhere and fracking is going on and you turn your tap water on and it smells like diesel fuel and you're drinking formaldehyde, you're going to do something about it. Or if your house got sucked into a sinkhole or blown up. So there's a lot of people that are really, really passionate about this. Just from posting it myself, I noticed so many people were sharing it and sending me emails thanking me so much for even talking about it because no one talks about it because these people are affected. But it seems that virtually no one in the political realm is speaking up about it to a real extent.
Now, this is kind of, we've been talking about this, but very briefly, because some people watching this may not even know what fracking is. They're like, well, what is that? Just briefly describe what that is.
All right. So I've described it a little bit before, but I'll describe it once again. So they go in with millions and millions of gallons of chemical soup. And I described it as chemical water before, but I'm going to go ahead and say that's a more accurate description. And once again, it contains diesel, formaldehyde, and lead. So they go in and they shoot underneath the earth miles deep. They shoot out the natural gas producers to essentially harvest the natural gas. And what that does is it can cause a sinkhole through the implosion. If you think about the foundation of a house and you're cutting out the bottom of the house will implode. Or if you're thinking about a shed or something like that, if you dig underneath all the dirt around the shed will fall in. Well, that's basically what's happening with a sinkhole in elementary terms. And not only is the sinkhole expanding in Louisiana, in Idaho, and other places, but it's turning into a much greater concern, as I've mentioned, because fracking is happening all around the country, all around the world, and the earthquake amounts are increasing.
Now, what can viewers do to help the I don't want to call it anti-fracking movement, but you understand what I mean. What can they do to help your cause?
Well, first of all, virtually nobody knows about fracking and what it does. A lot of people I know about, I've heard about fracking, but they don't really know what it's doing. They don't know about the sinkholes. For example, I posted on Facebook before, has anyone heard of these Louisiana sinkholes, blah, blah. Everyone said, no, I've never heard about this in my entire life. And these are people that are super awake. These are people that read Infowars.com, read my site, read National News, everything, and they didn't even hear about these sinkholes. So the first thing to do is to start generating some awareness about it and then start looking into it for yourself. Everyone should formulate their own opinions. What's going on here? Because a lot of things you have to put the puzzle pieces together, like I said. Outside of that, you can start generating some awareness and contacting your politicians in the area, but chances are they're not going to really do anything. So unless there's a real critical mass behind it, then I don't think anything's going to be done about it.
Now, Mr. Gucciardi, in the last 2 minutes that we have, is there anything else you'd like to relay to the public?
Well, yeah, I think the fact of the matter is that this is only here because we've allowed it to an extent. We put up with so much crap basically going on with our food supply and everything else that it's only logical that these companies would take advantage of this and go in and just basically cause turmoil for their profits. So the best thing to do is to be prepared for the future by putting your foot down and basically saying we're not going to take this anymore and we're not going to have our lands destroyed by these greedy corporations that are government backed.
Well, Mr. Gucciardi, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate the fact that you're making the public aware of this. And thank you once again for being a part of our of our show here tonight. We really appreciate it.
Thanks a lot for having me on.
And speaking of health, we're now going to go to part 1 of a 5-part interview series that's going to be aired throughout this whole week. It features pharmacist Ben Fuchs, and he's going to be interviewing Dr. Joel Wallach. Both of these men are pioneers in the nutritional health field, and they're going to be talking about a lot of important topics pertaining to our health. So let's go to part 1 of this dynamic interview.
Hey there, I'm Pharmacist Ben, and I am so proud and honored to be talking to this gentleman sitting by my side here, Dr. Wallach. I've known him for going on 15 years. I got a tape in the mail, like a lot of folks, Dead Doctors Don't Lie, back in the mid-90s, and then I had the incredible opportunity of getting to see Dr. Wallach, and since then, he never ceases to amaze me, and I'm really, really excited to get to not only for me to be getting to talk to him, but also for you guys to get to hear what Dr. Wallach has to say. So with that, Doc Wallach, thank you.
Well, thank you. Appreciate you.
Good to see you and good to be here with you. Why don't you tell the listeners a little bit about how you started. You got a great story about how you started to get involved with nutrition as a farm boy, how you noticed things with the animals, and how you had a personal connection with nutritional supplementation, how it worked out for you.
Well, I'd like to do that, Pharmacist Ben, but I'll tell you what, before we do that, how about you telling us a little bit about Pharmacist Ben?
About Pharmacist Ben? All right, well, Pharmacist Ben started his pharmacy career in 1986, and in pharmacy school, a lot of people don't realize this, but we study a little bit about nutrition, but we study nutrition in terms of how nutrients are medicines, and we study how diseases are deficiency diseases. So this is one of the reasons why I connected with you so well, because this is your message. We're not sick, we're starving. Many of the things that we consider to be diseases, heart disease, diabetes, the things we die from in this country, are really nutritional deficiencies at their core. And what I like to tell people is, at the point of death itself, we don't die of what it says on our death certificate. We die because some tissue system somewhere, some organ system somewhere is not being fed. So we literally die of nutritional deficiencies. And in pharmacy school, I was studying how vitamin A was connected to vitamin A deficiency was connected to night blindness, and vitamin C deficiency is connected to circulatory problems. And on the other hand, I was studying how prescription drugs were toxic and how they had side effects. I remember one time we watched a movie on beta blockers. These are drugs that stop the heart from working in order to lower blood pressure. And this was a movie put out by Ayers for their new drug Indoral, and it was going to revolutionize the hypertension business. And I remember the movie was an hour long, 15 minutes about how revolutionary their drug was, and 45 minutes was some guy reading the side effects of the new drug. 45 minutes, I'm telling you, reading the side effects. So I got the idea that we got a real big problem in this country in terms of healthcare. And the more I studied, the more I got into it, the more I realized that if we could just get nutrients in the hands of people, if we could just get people to start taking nutritional supplementation, we could do a lot of good. So I started practicing in my pharmacy using essential fatty acids to help people with their skin, essential fatty acids to help women with their menstrual cramps, B vitamins to help lower blood pressure, and lo and behold, as I'm sure you know, the results were tremendous. So from the get-go almost, I realized as a young pharmacist that we could be using nutritional supplements instead of using medicines, and we could be helping a heck of a lot more people, and we could be saving a lot of money on top of that. Then when I heard your message, I was all over it. I got that tape in the mail, Dead Doctors Don't Lie, and I was like, who is this guy? And I listened to it, and I listened to it, and I got to tell you, I stole some of your ideas, and I went out and I started talking to folks using some of your ideas. And then one day I was working out in the gym, and I met a guy, and we were talking. I said, you have to hear this tape, Dead Doctors Don't Lie. I said, oh my God, I know Dr. Wallach. And it turns out that this guy knew our mutual friend, Robert Snook. And long story short, he took me to one of your talks. I listened to one of your talks, and I was a believer and a follower. And that's how I got involved with longevity, and that's how I got involved with you. So in any case, now I want to talk about you. And your story is very interesting, how you started with nutritional supplementation. Now, I started, it was already the 1980s. So it was there were already people who were understanding that vitamin C and the B complex and essential fatty acids and minerals were very important. But when you were working with nutrients, you were talking about the 1940s. Vitamins were only really discovered 20 years before by mainstream science. So for you to get on board, you had to be quite the visionary. I wonder if you could maybe tell the viewers a little bit about how, what went through your synapses to make you realize, hey, there's something out there that we could be using to help take care of what people are considering diseases, people are considering genetics, genetic maladies, people are considering birth defects, but really are nothing more than nutritional deficiencies.
Well, it actually started when I was 4 years old. I had a disease that would be called today Tourette syndrome. They didn't have a name for it back then, but it's Tourette syndrome. And I had facial tics, and blink my eyes, and I'd get facial cramps, and it progressed. It got worse every year. By the time I was 9 years old, I'd go into a tetany and fall over, and my friends, my peers, my age group, classmates would say I was possessed, and they could bump me around and give me a bear hug and cause me to go into this tetany. And so I started complaining to my mom, and she took me to an eye doctor for some reason, who's an MD eye doctor, and they examined me and said, can't find anything wrong with him, except he's got very long eyelashes, and they're hitting his glasses, curling back and tickling his eyeballs. That's what's setting this off.
They thought that was what, he tried to say that was causing the tetany.
That's right. And so I'm 9 years old, and I'm not buying it. And I said, no, that can't be my eyelashes tickling my eyeballs. It's too much of a systemic problem. I didn't use the word systemic, but my whole body was affected, so I didn't believe it was just my eyes. So the next morning I went to the library in school, and I went and found a nurse's health handbook and looked for long eyelashes and eyelid twitches and that kind of stuff, and couldn't find anything. So I just went into the index and just started A, and I got down to cramps. I said, well, maybe it's a cramp, because I was playing sports and 9 years old, and I said, well, I've heard of leg cramps and things. And so I looked it up in the book, cramps, and it said it was a calcium deficiency. Well, before the bus would pick me up to go to school every morning, I would feed our calves we were going to take to the auction this little bag full of alfalfa pellets, but it had a little analysis tag on it, and I'd read the analysis tag. It talked about protein and fiber and calcium. And so I went home that day after school, ran right to the barn, started eating these calf pellets. Tasted like sawdust, but hey, I had a problem. I was going to get rid of it. Next morning, I threw the Cheerios out to the chickens. I filled that cereal bowl up with the calf pellets, put milk on it. I did that for 3 days. By the third day, it was gone.
Forever.
Forever.
Wow.
And of course, I've been taking the 90 essential nutrients twice a day since I was 9 years old, 64 years.
So what went through your head as a young boy when you're taking these things that are for the calves, and all of a sudden you're this movement disorder that must have been traumatic for you as a kid? What went through your head? You thought it was a miracle?
Well, I thought it was one of those eureka moments, because I understood something that doctors didn't. I recognized immediately that doctors didn't know anything about nutrition when I was 9 years old. And I don't know if that was a divine appointment or what, but I do know that I realized then at 9 years of age that doctors really didn't know much about that sort of thing. And I didn't realize that I was going to get into it as a profession, but I knew that I could help myself and I could help my mom and my grandmom and that kind of stuff. And so I began to do more reading on nutrition, and I began to mix chicken food with the calf pellets and dog food, and I was making my own little meatloaf and things. And
as a 9-year-old boy?
As a 9-year-old boy. By the time I was 18, I really had it figured out, and went to agricultural school at the University of Missouri. Halfway through ag school, applied for veterinary school, got accepted, finished my ag degree. 2 years into my veterinary degree, actually found the first case of a mass die-off from pollution, got it written up in international journals and veterinary journals, and that started my path between nutrition and finding a mass die-off from pollution and actually get written it up. It was the first one in America.
Okay, I want to hear about this mass die-off. That sounds interesting.
Well, halfway through ag school, I applied for veterinary school. I was just, as a lark, I figured I'm going to start practicing, so when I graduate ag school, I'll apply and I'll know what I'm doing. Well, because I was working my way through school, feeding the university's beef herd and the dairy herd and milking the cows, the herdsman gave me very good recommendations, and so I got in as a sophomore ag student. They said, well, you really don't have to finish ag school if you don't want to, but I wanted to. So by the time I finished ag school, I'm a sophomore veterinary student, and now I'm a graduate student. Well, that just so happens in 1962, all the professors took off and left the graduate students in charge of all the services. And of course, pathology services, farmers would bring in dead animals, you had to find out what they died from and so on. Or you have to look at biopsies from surgery of small animals. Well, there's one day, this farmer brings in 50 lambs, and he says he had 500 lambs die the night before. I said, anybody else around? He said, no, it's just me. He said, I don't understand it. And so I started doing autopsies on him. As soon as I cut that first lamb open, I knew what it was, because the blood that came out onto the wool looked like chocolate milk, which is methemoglobin. Only
It's
is
methemoglobin.
Methemoglobin.
So it's it's an oxidized hemoglobin, a darkened hemoglobin?
It looks exactly like chocolate milk.
Wow.
Instead of red or purple or black. And it's only caused by one thing, and that is nitrate poisoning. It's the only thing that will cause it. So I knew immediately it was a nitrate poisoning thing. So I said, did you use extra fertilizer in your crops? He said, no, I didn't. I said, well, I need a water sample, and I need some, bring it in tomorrow. And as I'm finishing the autopsies, every one of these lambs, instead of having thyroid glands the size of a lima bean, one lobe on each side, each one the size of a lima bean, each one was the size of a plum. And when you cut through it, instead of being like a beet, you know, firm and crisp, when you cut through it, it was like blackberry jam.
So it's like rotten and decaying.
Yes, yes. And so I knew that these lambs, and every one of them had the same problem. These were 6-month-old lamb. They had 2-inch wool. They were beautiful. I put 10 of them in my freezer and ate them, right? There's nothing wrong with them, except that they had goiter and methemoglobin. And it turns out that the neighbor had bought some fertilizer, high nitrate fertilizer, to get more corn for his bang for his buck, and it was uphill and rained and got down this guy's well. Well, did all the chemistry on the water, the feed, the lamb's blood and their liver and everything. And what happened was, why did 500 of them die in one night? And so I figured, okay, it has to do with metabolism and temperature and stuff. Well, it was December, and in Missouri, in December, you can have a day like today. It could be 50 degrees in December in Missouri. And it's been like 42, 50, 36, 38. Well, the night they all died, it was 19 degrees. It just dropped to 19 degrees, and they all died of hypothermia.
The metabolism was off.
Their thyroid gland wasn't working, so they couldn't maintain their body temperature. 500 lambs died of hypothermia in one night. Wrote that up, got it published in the National Journal of the American Veterinary Medical Association, and also international journals. And I became instantly known as a student worldwide.
That's awesome. And you're 22 at the time?
22, yeah.
That's awesome. So I think it's really important that people understand that you have a lot of great, incredible wisdom and intuition when it comes to nutrition and chemistry, but it comes from actually working with the tissue hands-on. You actually saw what these nutritional deficiencies do to the tissue, to the organ systems of the body. And I think people need to recognize that this is not just theory, and this is not just book learning. This is actually hands-on understanding about what nutrition does to the body in terms of its the body's organ structure, and the body's cell structure, and the body's tissue structure. That's super important. There's not a lot of people out there who are pathologists or have pathology background and a nutritional background as well.
And a physician and a veterinarian.
That's right. That's right. That's right.
The thing that followed up from that was I was working with Marlon Perkins as a kid during high school, and he got me a job doing
That's the Wild Kingdom.
Wild Kingdom, Mutual of Omaha, Marlon Perkins, and he got me a job in Africa on the white rhino project, which had to do with saving the white rhinos. It was one of those conservation projects. And I was able to get 200 of them, bring them back to the United States, caught them. And so if you see a white rhino in a zoo or a wild animal park, it's either one that I caught or maybe offspring. Well, because of that paper, Perkins, and this was the time when pollution was being brought to the surface by Silent Spring, you know, the movie, and Rachel Carson, the book, and so forth. And he was very good. He thought, you know, we have all these animals dying from natural causes in zoos. Maybe pollution has something to do with it. Kind of like the canary in the mine concept, like the old Welsh coal miners. If the gases got in the mine, the canaries would drop off the perch long before the men would die, and they could run out before they blew up.
So extinct animals were like a canary in the coal mine, or animals that were becoming extinct.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so he said, we're wasting this material. We need to have, and I know a guy, Wallach, because I'd give him copies of that paper on the lambs.
Oh, wow.
So he pulls me back out of Africa, and he made me the chief pathologist in that project, which combined the services of the Shaw's Botanical Gardens in St. Louis, the zoo, and the biology department of Washington University. And so it was called the Center for the Biology of Natural Systems. And to make a long story short, over a period of 12 years, I did over 20,000 autopsies, and over 17,500 were on over 454 species of zoo animals, 3,000 human beings who lived in close proximity to the zoo. And the book that came out of it is 1,200 pages. It's in the Smithsonian Institute as a national treasure. Well, they were shipping me all over the place.
Well, what struck you, what hit you the most? 12,000 autopsies, that's a lot of tissue.
20,000.
20,000 autopsies. That's a lot of tissue you're looking at. What struck you the most? What was the most, made the biggest impression on you from looking at all that tissue?
well, pharmacists bend.
Yes.
The most profound finding, and this was sort of in the summary there was like 75 scientific papers that came out, published in international journals. I mean, this was a big project. National Institutes of Health, $25 million, which is a lot of money back then. It was chump change now, but back then it was a lot of money for a 24-year-old kid, right? And so the profound bottom line finding was, and this is published now, every animal and every human being who dies of natural causes dies of a nutritional deficiency disease.
That's awesome.
Pollution was kind of a background thing, and in some cases it contributed to it. And those are another long stories.
But they could have handled the pollution if they were nutritionally solid.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. That's beautiful. So now this is 1962.
1962.
This is 1962. So take us forward, because you didn't start to become well known, and the Dead Doctors Don't Lie didn't hit for another
1993.
Until 1993. So take us forward from 1962 through the 60s. What's going through your head as you're seeing that there's this problem with nutritional deficiencies, and it must have hit you that, hey, we got a big problem here.
We knew it was a big problem, and when I was in Africa for that 2 years working in the White Rhino Project, I was still studying nutrition because I wanted to know what elephants were eating, where they were getting their minerals, where they were getting their vitamins. We were testing water and testing the leaves on the trees and the bark that they were eating and so forth, and writing papers from that too and so forth. And when it came back and began to do these autopsies, they would send me, the National Institutes of Health and the National Science Foundation would send me to different facilities, because some facilities had whales and some didn't. Some facilities had walruses and some had gorillas and didn't. And so they wanted me to do autopsies or draw blood samples or whatever I had to do to get as many species involved in this project. Well, they actually, after the time at the St. Louis Zoo, they sent me to the Brookfield Zoo in Chicago because they had whales, and they had the Shedd Aquarium with dolphins, and they had the Brookfield Zoo and the Lincoln Park Zoo, so the number of species went way up. And I was walking into this office, and I'm unpacking, and there's two biologists there who are getting ready to go on an expedition into Alaska to catch some wild Arctic foxes. And I said, oh, that sounds like an interesting project. Why are you doing that? They said, well, we have a pair of Arctic foxes here at the zoo, at the Brookfield Zoo in Chicago, and they must have some terrible gene, because Arctic foxes normally have 10 to 12 kits in their litter, and they were only having 3 to 5 kits, and they're always born with this birth defect, so they have this terrible genetic problem. So we want to get some wild genes and bring that in and reconfigure the genes and so forth. They said, well, tell me about it. And they said, well, 5 years earlier, the babies were born with neural tube defects, and 4 years earlier, they were born with no limbs. 3 years earlier, they're born with no diaphragm, so they all suffocated to death.
All different things.
All different things. Yeah. Every year is a different thing. And then the last year, they had cleft palates. And I said, well, it's not genetic, because it'd be the same birth defect. It'd be like the same birth defect year after year.
If it's one gene, it'll be the same problem.
Exactly. He says, what are you feeding them? Ground up horse meat. And I said, well, are you giving them any vitamins, minerals? No, because they're meat eaters. We just give them meat. And so I knew what the problem was right away. So I said, okay, I'll tell you what. Since your guys are leaving this week, why don't you get them off a display? They're imperfect. I played to their beliefs, right? So I said, they're imperfect specimens anyway. Give them to me. Let me kind of work on them and do some tests on them. And they were happy with that. They brought them up there. And when they left, I went to the grocery store and bought some dog food for toy dogs. And I gave it to the foxes. Within a couple of months, they had a normal litter of 12 babies. So I did the thing that a good farmer would do. I inbred them, right? I bred the mother to the sons, the father to the daughters, the brother to the sisters, and by doing that, I had 300 foxes very quickly.
Right.
And then I inbred them, and I inbred them. By the time 3 years went by, I had over a couple of thousand foxes. They were in the reptile house, the bird house, the administration
healthy
building.
Foxes.
They're all perfectly healthy,
Yeah.
Not a single defect in any of them, because they're all getting dog food, which is perfect.
Well, I think what you're talking about here is so interesting, because this is the middle 60s now we're talking?
This is the early 60s, yeah.
Well, today, the cutting edge in science and in genetics is not genetics at all, it's epigenetics.